Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to stay with this story and talk now to Simon Schofield. He's a UK-based senior fellow at the Human Security Centre. He joins me now. Good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for having me, Mary.
Simon, your overview. You've been watching and listening, like we all have, to the events unfolding in Berlin. What is your immediate response to what has happened and who is responsible?
Well, first off, obviously, it's absolute horror that there will now be 12 empty chairs at Christmas dinner that didn't have to be there, and that's that's a terrible shame. But from a security point of view, it's a fairly classic now jihadist attack to use cars or vehicles as weapons. It was first popularized by Al-Qaeda in Inspire magazine. It's now a mainstay in Palestine, and we've seen it before in Paris as well, and even in Ohio in the United States. So it's I would want to point the finger at a jihadist group. It's unclear at this stage the degree to which it was organized or who exactly perpetrated it, but I think based on sort of the modus operandi, you can safely say it's a jihadist attack.
Is there a difference here to Nice and to some other attacks, that in this case it would appear that the perpetrator or perpetrators did not take their lives as part of a suicide attack, but are now at large, perhaps?
Yes, it's different this time in that sense. I'm very clear that I don't believe the man in custody is the man responsible for this attack.
At all.
Contacts I have inform me that the man in custody was a man from Balochistan in Pakistan, and that he is from actually quite a secular area in Pakistan that doesn't sort of indulge in jihadist extremism, and that he's absolutely innocent.
So can you make any sense out of what happened last night in the heat of what was taking place in Berlin after that truck mowed into people at the Christmas market, and this Pakistani man was followed, we're told, escaping from the truck and on foot?
From what I can understand, this man was on his way back to the refugee camp, and I can only assume that he was perhaps running away from the attack at the time, and that perhaps someone saw him as a fleeing suspect, being a man of South Asian origin, and that chased him and perhaps thought they were doing a service, but it turns out not to be so.
Lines got crossed along the way, and this man, whom you believe to be innocent, is still in custody. Is it generally, we look at what has happened in Belgium and in France, and can we say that is this more likely to be a refugee asylum seeker, or is it more likely to be a homegrown terrorist, somebody who perhaps has been born, educated and raised in Germany?
Well, I wouldn't want to speculate for definite one way or another, but let's make no mistake, Islamic State has a very clear and declared strategy of making use of the influx of refugees as a way of moving its operatives into the country, and so you can't rule it out. Equally, quite a lot of the attacks that have been carried out in recent times have been from homegrown people, so you can't rule anything out at this stage.
I was talking to Kate Connolly about security at the market in Berlin, given that there had been warnings from US security sources of a potential attack on a Christmas market. As you look at the level of security in Berlin and in other cities across Europe, is that level of security sufficient?
It's always a trade-off with security and liberty. If we locked every citizen in a cage, then they'd certainly be permanently safe, but they wouldn't be very, very free. So there's always going to be a trade-off to a degree. If you look at Newcastle in the United...
Sorry, I was going to say, she talked about people now saying, you should have bollards, there shouldn't have been access to the Christmas market area, basic security measures.
I think enhanced security measures in that sense of more bollards, I think, is always going to be sensible, although they will always find ways around them. That's the problem. If you look at Newcastle, for example, in the United Kingdom, the police deployed armed guards to the Christmas markets there, and it caused quite a stir. People were quite unnerved by it and in some ways felt less safe because they were there. So I suppose that's the trade-off you make.
Again, we're talking generally, but if this is an Islamic State attack or Islamic State motivated attack, what is generally the modus operandi in terms of claiming responsibility?
Well, Islamic State are very clear that they only claim responsibility for attacks where the person has declared themselves an ally of the Islamic State prior to that. They're surprising in that sense, in that a lot of other jihadist groups tend to clamour to take credit for whatever they can to enhance their own image, but they seem to be quite meticulous in that regard.
Simon Schofield, Senior Fellow at the Human Security Centre, thank you for joining us. 21 minutes past 5 at